Good day, everyone, wherever you are. Welcome to another video. We're going to continue our focus on the coronavirus, and we're going to explore this potentially debilitating battle, perhaps a cosmic battle, going on right now in this country and indeed around the world. And this battle is between Darwin and Jesus. Now, before I continue, let me just say, by focusing on a religious figure like Jesus, I'm by no means kind of propagating Christianity, my own religious beliefs, or any of that stuff. That's not the purpose of this video today. Jesus is merely being used as a symbol of compassion, of mercy, of thoughtfulness. And there are many other people throughout history who could easily kind of fit into this category. I'm just merely using Jesus as one example. So this idea of a battle between Darwin and Jesus popped up in my own life when I was carrying out research in 2008 and 2009 on Muslims in the United States. And at the time, I was exploring what it means to be an American through the lens of Muslims. And one of the theories that I worked on with Professor Akbar Ahmed of American University was this idea of Darwin versus Jesus. So this battle between Darwin and Jesus is not so much about how society originated and evolved, but what defines and motivates it. The core principles of the Darwinian thesis and the Jesus thesis, if I could call it that, are diametrically opposed to one another and cannot coexist simultaneously in one society without causing severe friction. That passage is taken from an article written by Professor Akbar Ahmed on a website called The Globalist. So the Darwin-Jesus thesis goes something like this. Darwin represents adaptability and survival. Jesus represents compassion and universal love. Darwin acknowledges that those who cannot adapt will not adapt and must not survive. For Jesus, on the other hand, it is precisely the least privileged members in society who are deserving of support. For Darwin, concepts like morality, compassion, humility, austerity, poverty, shame, and honor are absolutely irrelevant in this struggle of survival. And we see this playing out in light of the coronavirus pandemic, this idea of people struggling to survive. And it may not necessarily be a physical survival, but a survival to pay the bills, to stay healthy, to take care of people's loved ones. Darwin described essentially a struggle for existence in which the weakest are eliminated from society. Only the fit are able to survive. The survivors will pass on their characteristics to the next generation, and in time, a new group of people will form. As a direct consequence of the dominance of Darwinian thinking in American society, especially in light of the pandemic, Americans remain in a state of anxious competitiveness that creates insecurity and engenders fear and anger. So how do we place this dichotomy of Darwin and Jesus into the context of the coronavirus? Well, we see an article by Mike Allen and Jim Vanderhei on Axios, and the article is titled America's Gaping Coronavirus Inequality. And they actually turned to Darwin and referred to the current pandemic as, quote, a Darwinian moment, where the strong in business, wealth, and health are more likely to survive, while many others will sadly wither. According to the article, this pandemic is exposing and deepening many of the nation's great divides. For example, many of the people who are disproportionately hurt by the virus have the least control over or say in the system. It's predominantly the old people and the previously or already ill who are getting hit the hardest. The coronavirus is also exposing long-standing healthcare inequities, and communities of color and low-income families are bearing the brunt. And all last week, and indeed early in this week, we see numbers and statistics coming out on who is really being hit the hardest by the coronavirus pandemic, and story after story and article after article is pointing to the African American community and the Latinx community in the United States bearing the brunt of this virus.
Now to an alarming new trend. The coronavirus is hitting African Americans worse than others. In Louisiana, more than 70% of the nearly 600 deaths connected to coronavirus are Black. But why? David Gonzalez explains.
It's a tremendous challenge. It's terrible.
President Trump reacting to data that shows African Americans are being hit hard by coronavirus, calling it disproportional. In Houston, numbers on the impact the virus is having on Black communities are unavailable. But Mayor Sylvester Turner says health disparities have always existed in minority populations and are heightened because of COVID-19.
People who are in low-income communities, people who have underlying health conditions, hypertension, diabetes, renal failure, all of those things will help to accentuate their situation.
Health experts agree. They say the virus isn't targeting a specific group, but because higher percentages of African Americans or Latinos live in poverty, if they get the virus, they may have more health problems or deaths because of underlying issues.
This disease causing bigger problems in minorities, it makes sense. And it's something we have to keep an eye on because these people are at higher risk of bad outcomes.
It's something they have to keep an eye on. Experts say while it's hard to immediately change the impact pre-existing conditions have in these communities, you can do something to curb the threat of coronavirus.
So the best way to help everyone would be decrease the amount of exposure.
That means social distancing. In the meantime, the city is working to improve access to testing sites to those who make up these vulnerable communities. In Houston, I'm David Gonzalez, KHOU 11 News.
So again, we see the Darwinian thesis popping up. Those without health insurance are less likely to get tested or seek treatment, which increases their mortality rate. Those who live in states with governors or mayors who are slow to react or stubborn to face reality will inevitably lead to suffering and dying. The Darwinian dynamic also feels especially pertinent to businesses. Millions of companies and jobs will be wiped away, with mainly the strong or the well-connected able to hang on. So those with capital, those with power and status are likely to survive. Those who do not have these three attributes may not survive. And the question, I suppose, then becomes whether the people in power have the, let's call it, Jesus mentality to have compassion and mercy for those who are struggling in the face of this pandemic. So again, those companies with stronger connections and lobbyists will get bailouts to stay alive. Those smaller businesses with good connections to banks will be first in line for government money to stay afloat. Those mom and pop shops with good local businesses but thin margins will struggle mightily, and many will go under without substantial aid delivered quickly. Those workers who can easily transition to remote work will be fine. Those in blue-collar jobs that can only be done in person are not only more vulnerable to the virus, but also losing their jobs and insurance. So here we have it, the struggle of the Darwinian versus Jesus thesis playing out right in front of our eyes. Why are the least fortunate, the least privileged, and the communities dealing with the most systemic, institutionalized barriers to freedom and mobility, why are they being hit harder than those in positions of power? We see so many Americans around this country saying that this is a Christian nation, that Christian values should lead the way in terms of our societal vision and our framework. But where are these values? What does it mean to be a Christian, I suppose? That's another question that pops up in light of this thesis that I'm presenting to you today. So ultimately, it makes us wonder who is going to come out on top of this kind of struggle, this eternal battle that we see unfolding right in front of our eyes. Will the Darwin thesis, the survival of the fittest, come out on top, or will the compassionate, merciful Jesus mentality, and again, I'm not saying Jesus mentality to promote any of my own beliefs or any Christian beliefs, it's just a symbol of a larger kind of paradigm that I'm talking about. So my question is quite vague and open, and I really just want everyone to reflect on this binary, this Darwin-Jesus dichotomy, this survival of the fittest versus compassion for the less fortunate. How is this thesis playing out in front of our eyes right now? How do you feel about this thesis? And if you were to put on your kind of genie hat and you were to predict the future, how do you see these two paradigms playing out in the future of this country and indeed the future of the world? So feel free to do with these questions what you wish. Always looking forward to hearing from each of you. And today's topic is quite theoretical, so have some fun with it. I hope you enjoy. Stay safe and take care.